Hi, I'm here with Brad Kirshenbaum, the Director of Innovation at CA Ventures, and we're here to talk about trends in the multifamily industry. Brad oversees 50 assets in the US alone and is expanding internationally with an additional over 12 assets in development over the next 3 years. We're excited to dive into some topics, and we hope you enjoy this segment. So let's get into multifamily. How did you first enter the multifamily industry? And what have you been surprised, now that you're 2.5 years in, what have you been surprised to learn about the industry?
So it was kind of a circuitous route here. I was in education for a long time, but CA specializes quite a bit in, we build multifamily and student housing all over the world. And my master's is in education, and I was familiar with a few people who worked at CA, and I'd always bounced ideas off of them as these are different ways that I think it'd be really interesting to enhance the resident experience and serve the students that are living there a lot better. And one thing led to another, and here we are 2.5 years later, and it's been a great adventure. I think that in terms of what's been surprising, it's really how much room there still is for growth. You would think that it would be something that kind of stagnated, and it's just here's where you live, and this is what you do in the place that you live. But it's much more dynamic than that, and it's been a privilege to be a part of that growth.
It sounds like it, and kudos to you and the whole CA team for your massive expansion, and the international projects on multiple continents sound very exciting.
Yeah.
Speaking of growth, so what themes of new technologies does CA find most interesting right now?
So we look at new technologies through kind of 3 different lenses and try to hit on 3 different pillars. The first is enhancing the resident experience. The second is improving the property management team's experience, making their lives easier. And then at the end of the day, the one that most everybody gets excited about is either making more money or saving money somewhere along the line. Always comes down to the dollars and cents. So from the student side, we've done a lot or I shouldn't say from the student side, from the resident side, we've been trying to enhance the resident experience quite a bit. And a few things that we've looked at have been providing flexibility to the residents. So there's a pretty wide range of feelings amongst millennials and Gen Z about ownership versus rental. They don't want to generate waste. And so we've been looking at some creative solutions for how people who are moving into the building, if you're coming from, say, Pennsylvania to live in a building in California, you don't want to move everything you own all the way across the country. Or if you're an international student, you don't want to bring everything over from overseas. So providing people the option to, either have packages that are there waiting in their room for them, or rent items. If you're gonna, we do student housing. When I was in college, I wasn't exactly vacuuming every day. Owning a vacuum would have been a little bit overkill at that point. So giving them the option to rent a vacuum is something we've looked at. But then being more thoughtful about our spaces, having study lounges or amenity spaces that actually provide a function other than, hey, wouldn't that be neat? And so having white noise and sound masking so you can have a little bit of a sense of privacy but still enhance your productivity. Having items that are specific to a market that's being served. If you have a lot of young professionals living in one of our multifamily buildings and it's in a city that is primarily engineering focused, then having something there that would help keep them and retain them and make it a more meaningful experience. Similarly for residents, if we have a property in Kent, Ohio, that is a University of Kent, or Kent State University, I should say, is a well-known design school, which I did not know beforehand. And so we tried to be thoughtful around that and meet that demographic where it is. From the property management side and from enhancing that experience, we want to make them as effective as possible. So improving our leasing process. Virtual leasing has been really big the last year, and I think that's something that is really going to stick. So providing people the option to see a place in a way that they can visualize what they would decorate it as. A 22-year-old guy who's living with 3 of his buddies in a 4-bedroom apartment in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, is probably going to decorate his place a little differently than a 22-year-old girl who's moving out of the sorority house with 3 of her friends. It's going to be the same format, it's going to be the same furniture because we provide furniture to all of our residents, but they're going to decorate it a little bit differently.
Sure.
So instead of having a property management team go in and say, well, imagine what this is going to look like if you have Bear Bryant's photo everywhere, and if you have houndstooth all over the place, which would be a kind of tacky way to do it, but that's why I don't do interior design.
Right.
they can visualize that and they can see that using AI and it can be projected. Similar, and then you do the inverse with the sorority girls that are coming in there. These are, stereotypical examples, but it helps when you can actually see yourself in a place. But that allows our property teams and our leasing and marketing managers to be more specific in their skill set, to be salespeople, to be closers, to be people who are able to really direct their energy in the right way.
On the resident experience bucket, while we're still there, I know that you're a big reader into Gen Z trends, which definitely impacts not only student housing, where Gen Z is right now, but also conventional multifamily, where CA has assets. Any amenities coming to the forefront over the next couple of years? Anything interesting and noteworthy that you think is because of Gen Z differences in social media or anything else?
Yeah, podcasts are huge right now, and so we've tried to address that part of it. Everybody has a podcast.
Yeah.
Even you. I mean, if they're going to give you one, then here we are.
Well,
it's I'm allowed to make fun of you on your own podcast, right?
Of course.
Yeah. But so we've looked at putting recording equipment in and giving people the opportunity to be able to record podcasts in the spaces, which is not as easy as here's a microphone and here is a computer. It's, do we do soundproofing? Do we do sound booths? And do we get AV design into that, or is it interior design? So being thoughtful around that and giving them the flexibility to, to be creative and want to stick around. If somebody's producing a podcast out of one of our buildings, the odds that they'll renew their lease, a little better.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so resident amenities. Obviously, CA is very focused there. I think you said a second bucket is things that help the staff become more efficient. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
So providing residents or our property teams the opportunity to, like I said, be really specific in their skill sets and using their time wisely, because self-guided touring is another piece that has really caught on over the last year or so that I think is great, because now our property team can handle requests from residents. They can, again, focus on being salespeople more so than tour guides, and it gives them time back in their day. And if you can let somebody into the building after hours and you can figure out a way to streamline that process, now you don't have to pay somebody to be on site at 8 o'clock at night, right, which is sometimes when people can tour. If somebody's coming from a job, that's when they can stop by. 9 to 5 doesn't work for everybody because they're always working during that time. So right, giving them that flexibility from the property team, that just makes them more efficient, and maybe you don't need a larger property team and you can reallocate their time and their resources that way. And then from the make more money piece of it, this all kind of ties into that. The resident experience, people stick around, that's great. You're going to probably make more money that way. Right. The more efficient property teams, it's great. Yep. You're using their time wisely. But then there's also wins that you can have just from a building systems perspective. And one of the things that we've really been looking at is, through a sustainability lens, is just making our properties more efficient in how they use their energy, how their elevators work. We've got integrations set up with our access control where we can have the elevators automatically called down to the floor when somebody walks into the building. Oh, wow. But if it's already there and it's anticipating that, it's a little bit less of an energy drain when you have something like that. If you can outsource data and predict weather patterns, which we've been working with some groups that can do that, you can have predictive HVAC systems where if you know it's going to be 100 degrees tomorrow, it's a lot easier to start cooling the building down before it's 100 degrees than cool it down when it's already 100 degrees.
Interesting, and these add up to pretty serious dollars and cents when you're running a large asset.
Yeah, we're still piloting some of these, and so we don't have raw numbers to it, but the percentage gains in terms of potential cost reduction is pretty great. So
this is a great segue. What are the benefits from smart home technology, and do you feel that there just might be a little too much hype in smart home for multifamily right now?
I think there's way too much hype in the way that people envision traditional smart home technology. It's always been visualized as, you walk in and Alexa or Siri or Google, I probably just set off all of our phones. Whoever you have named your assistant says, what do you want? And I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and I want you to do everything else. But that's not what everybody wants. Mm-hmm. I think that's cool, but I'm the director of innovation. Mm-hmm. I think everything like that's cool. Right. So we have to be very empathetic in how we view technology like that, because There's a lot of other people, my wife, for example, who, as I try to trick our place out with all sorts of crazy stuff, she doesn't want to have to talk to a digital assistant. She just kind of wants stuff to work or just do things the old way. Right. She doesn't want to be able to activate a sous vide with her voice. She's fine touching the button and making sure that it works the way that it does. And so we have to be really cognizant of that. And if you mandate that for every unit that you put into your building, not everybody's going to like that. You might retain fewer people than you scare away because they're like, I don't want to have to deal with that again for another year. I didn't own it for a reason. Right. But being thoughtful around how you implement it, there are a lot of benefits. So certain smart home technology, which is, it's standard stuff now, but having smart thermostats, that's great, especially because it can tie into that back-end system and you can manage a lot of the energy efficiency pieces. But you then have to deal with user credentials and figuring out how to reset that and how to control it. Right. Do you make them download another app? Right. So being thoughtful, again, around that piece of it is the double-edged sword and the catch-22 of it.
Got it. Yeah, and with technology evolving so quickly, especially digital and smart home technology, I imagine part of what you do is thinking about the future and trying to future-proof your buildings for maybe unexpected leaps in technology. So can you speak a little bit to how you and Mark Zikra, your SVP, think about future-proofing your buildings, especially as you're managing a development cycle that is all the way out in 2023 for some deliveries?
Yeah. We try to make sure that we have the capacity to deal with the estimates that are inevitably going to be too low and too wrong. If I had told you 5 years ago that every single person in a room is probably going to have 5 or 6 connected devices on them if they're at home, at minimum, you would have thought, well, boy, that seems pretty high, and that is low. It's really low. In a unit that we have with 4 average residents, you might have 50 or 55 connected devices.
Wow.
I mean, you get into, if everybody has a TV, that's all going to be on the Wi-Fi. If you have 2 PS4s and 2 Xboxes, that's going to be on the Wi-Fi. If you have an Apple Watch, everybody has an Apple Watch, that's going to be on the Wi-Fi. You've got your phones, you have your computers, you have your iPad. It all adds up really quickly. And then if you start adding, and we have to think about that also, if you start adding smart appliances, if you start adding smart light bulbs, and then you get to the thermostats that you can put in, you could have 100 items on a single access point pretty quickly.
Wow.
And the bandwidth requirement isn't huge, but something like Wi-Fi 6 is, because the way that it broadcasts is really important. So as we look at our new networks and upgrading our old networks, we want to make sure that that infrastructure is there. We've leaned really heavily into making sure that we have bulk managed Wi-Fi in all of our properties because that enables us to do so much more. If you rely on a technology that may not be ubiquitous in 5 to 10 years, you're setting yourself up for a really tough situation. There's Zigbee, there's Z-Wave, there's all these other standards out there, but Wi-Fi is not going to go anywhere. There's a debate about, who's going to win between this and this? Wi-Fi is always going to win. There might be something else out there in the short term. Right. But so we make sure that we have all the bandwidth that you could possibly imagine. We try to make sure that we have all of the capabilities that a building would need to expand their infrastructure that you could imagine, but then also not putting in things that are not going to be necessary. The cable cutting thing is kind of an old hat, but it's very relevant because we're not putting cable into a lot of our buildings because nobody wants it. Nobody's that excited about it. They're watching Netflix, they're watching Hulu, or they have YouTube TV, or they steal their parents' account information. Right. There's not a real benefit to providing some of that stuff. So it's not so much about everything that you put in, but some of the things that you leave out.
Right. Brad, as Director of Innovation, you must assess new vendors all the time, especially younger companies. Some will call them startups. How do you assess these vendors, especially the newer companies, to make sure that they're going to be a partner that can be with you over a long period of time?
Yeah, the startup world is fascinating because there's so many great companies out there and so many incredibly talented individuals that have the startup mentality. But what we look for is we want to make sure that they're also going to be able to grow up with us. And that's a big transition to go from startup to grow up. Right. And so we look at, are they going to be sustainable? Is this something where they have the funding that they can get to a point where we don't have to worry about them disappearing in 5 years?
Right.
we put something into our building and it only works if this company exists, then it doesn't work very well for us if they don't exist.
Right, and if it's not portable.
Exactly, yeah. So we really need to be cognizant of that. We want to work with people that we like too, people that are willing to adapt their offerings to something that benefits not just us, but the industry as a whole. So we work really closely with groups that are open-minded and thoughtful about the feedback that we give them. That's one of my favorite parts of my job, is being able to suggest, hey, if you guys, this is good. Have you ever thought about doing this? Because that would be 100 times cooler. Right. And that would make us want to do business with you more, either now or going forward. Because I love helping everybody that we meet with try to find the right path, because I think that the world grows better when egos are set aside. Yep. It benefits us as a company and it benefits them. So the open-mindedness and the humility to say, you know what, we didn't think about that, but we'll take your feedback and let's try to do it. That's huge.
Right. Great answer. Thank you. And Brad, also as Director of Innovation, you must get pitched by sales reps all the time. What works and what doesn't work when sales reps from companies are approaching you?
Persistence works, but so does patience. I've had weeks where I will receive 3 or 4 cold emails from the same person saying, hey, did you miss my last email? Yeah. And that's just not the best way to do it. Right. Because while I understand you're trying to get noticed in a sea of requests, one thing that I would always recommend is, if you're going to send me a cold email, which is fine, you have to get your name out there. I understand it. I'm not annoyed by that fact. But think about how it fits in with our business model and with what I do in particular. If you're not the right fit for us, I'll let you know, and I'll say this is just either we have a vendor for this, we're not interested at this time, but if we are, I keep a catalog. I have hundreds and hundreds of companies that I've had at least one interaction with that I just keep a general log of, to say we'll come back if somebody within the organization comes to me and says, hey, we need some sort of camera that can monitor construction equipment at during the early stages of construction. Right. We don't have a need for that right now, but we might. And so, but the constant badgering is not necessarily the right way to do it, because what ends up happening is then the emails go to everybody in the organization. And not every organization has somebody like myself or Mark where they can filter everything through us. But then you're going to end up having 7 different conversations with people within CA, and you're going to have 3 people who say yes, and 4 people who say no, and 2 people who say, what is this? And 1 person who says, why is this valuable? And it's always going to ultimately then fall back on either my lap or somebody else's, and then it's going to start all over again. So it's not the most effective use of time if you're just blasting things out there.
Absolutely. As Director of Innovation at CA Ventures, how do you view data security and in particular data regulation such as CCPR and GDPR, given that this seems to be a rising trend in the industry?
I mean, data privacy is huge. It's top of mind. I would say that cybersecurity and data privacy are 2 of the things that we are probably most focused on right now. They're not sexy, but it's something that matters. It matters to us because we want to be good stewards of our residents. We've had many groups approach us and say, hey, do you want to sell your resident data? And my answer is always no, because our residents aren't for sale. That's not the point. We want to provide them with the best living experience possible. Mm-hmm. But then we also want to be aware of the fact that Gen Z, millennials, everybody is concerned about data privacy. And so we want to be able to tell them every vendor who we vet is at the very least going to be in alignment with California's standards, which are the strictest in the country, and most likely GDPR, which is the strictest. That's the only way you're going to get into our properties internationally, mm-hmm. because you have to. Right. So we'd rather work with somebody who's already GDPR compliant or who's working to get to that point, so that if we decide to put you into something in Europe and you're willing to go over there, we don't have to go find another vendor. Right. We can already work with somebody who we know and we like.